Melanie Robleski, and I'm excited to share with you my family genogram. I'm going to start on my father's side with my grandmother that we knew as Grandma Peggy. However, her real name was Margaret, and throughout her lifetime, she had a lot of different jobs. As I knew her, she was always working all the way up until she was in her 80s when she did retire. And I knew her as a baker. She was not formally trained. She did not formally work in a kitchen. A lot of what she did was to contract out with neighbors, friends, family to provide wedding cakes or birthday cakes for their events. For years, she worked in customer service and retail, working for a company for over, 17 years called Worldworths. I keep saying it wrong, but they had a lunch counter. She would tell stories about that retail store that she worked at. She also had a degree in cosmetology. I shouldn't say a degree. She had a certificate. But back in the days that she received the certificate was the mid 1940s. It was more of an on-site apprenticeship training. So my father had told me stories that she would get trained by somebody who was doing and providing those services, and then kind of going along with her theme of just picking up odd jobs here and there. She would give people perms, haircuts, things right out of her house. My father remembers even when he was little, neighbors, people word of mouth who heard from neighbors or friends that she did hair coming through, bringing their kids for haircuts, hairstyles, all of that fun stuff. My grandma has now since passed, which is the with the X representing that. She was married to my grandfather, Joy, who passed when my father was a young man of age 21. They were divorced. My grandfather was born into a family farm. And after coming back from World War II, going onto the farm, they had a couple of really tough years, according to my dad, and the family farm closed down. From there, he was a truck driver for the rest of what my dad remembers. Just to kind of give a little bit of background, so my grandmother Peggy was adopted, and she grew up with what would have been her great aunt was her mother. She married very young my grandfather, who went off to war right after they were married. When my grandfather came back, the farm closed up. He got a job as truck driver. And then my father was born in 1953. My father was about the age of 7 or 8 that he recalls my grandfather, Joy is his name, ended up leaving the family, leaving my grandmother and moving from Minnesota to Texas, in which he continued his career as a truck driver, which then kind of leads me into my father. So my father also has a high school diploma, and he had a couple of years where he worked as a painter doing commercial spray painting for a variety of different companies around town. And then he settled into a career of a truck driver. He has semi-retired recently, but does continue to work as a commercial truck driver as needed. He also does still volunteering through the Salvation Army, using his truck driving skills to help pick up food for the Salvation Army and the community. Looking over at my mother's side, my grandfather Schultz, he has since passed away, but he was a commercial artist. He's the only member of my family that had any sort of college degree until I had gotten mine. He has a bachelor's degree from an art school in Milwaukee, and he worked all the way up until he passed away, specializing in commercial art for a variety of like hunting and fishing and outdoor companies and magazines. They would contact out, and he would do photo shoots and advertisements and things like that. My grandmother Schultz on the other side, married to my grandfather. She has also since passed, and she had a high school diploma, and she was a homemaker and raised 4 children, one of which being my mother. My mother was born in 1960, and she had a high school diploma, and she was a homemaker as well. Then going further down, to myself and my 2 sisters, I'll start with my oldest sister, Vanessa. My oldest sister, Vanessa, is a bank teller, or was a bank teller. She currently works for U.S. Bank in the commercial loan center, where she works processing and doing data entry for loans. I will kind of move to myself. I'm the middle sister, and I am a family consumer science educator. I was the first person in my family to get a college degree besides my grandfather. There's a lot of reasons that I'll get into about that as we kind of take a look at the patterns. But I want to go over to my sister Tana, my younger sister. She has a master's degree, and currently she works for Disney as a human resource coordinator. I should probably bop back over to my husband. My husband is a firefighter and holds the position of captain. Right now, a fire captain for his department. He has his associate degree. And it's interesting to look even at his family patterns, because his father was a professional firefighter, and now he's a professional firefighter, and his older brother is a professional firefighter, and my husband and his brother work for the same fire department. So when I look really truly at my family genogram, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about just some of the hardships when I look at my family tree and how that has affected, each individual's opportunities that perhaps they may have had. So when I look at my father's side of the family. So my grandpa had left when my dad was very young. He ended up being, diagnosed with alcoholism. My grandfather did, and ended up passing away of liver cancer when my dad was, like I said, a young man. My father then became an alcoholic in his life, and did thankfully stop drinking and went into treatment and recovery probably when I was about 10 years old. To look at those patterns and how they affected our careers, my sister went into treatment when she was 16, my younger sister, for drug and alcohol treatment. All while that's going on, I had to work really, really hard to put myself through school. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. So when I went to get my bachelor's degree, I was working full time as a 19-year-old. And I was living in Oshkosh to support help support my mother, as my father was an on-the-road truck driver and my sister was in treatment. So I would drive myself 3 days a week to Stevens Point to attend my classes, come back to Oshkosh, and then work a shift working at a local retreat house. It's a Catholic retreat house called the Jesuit Retreat House that I worked at. And my hours were very flexible, but I did cleaning, I did cooking with the cooking skills that I had gotten from my grandmother, Peggy, who again did the different baking that passed that skill on to me. And that's what that put me through college in order to receive my my bachelor's degree. A few years after teaching, I got my master's degree from Marion, and now I'm working on my degree as a career and technical educator. But I can see the patterns in my family of the career pathways have very much been truck driving, a high school diploma. My younger sister, after getting out of treatment, she decided she really needed to do something with her life. And she had met with a really great career counselor through Fox Valley Tech as part of the treatment program that she was in. They got her set on some awesome career pathways. Her senior year of high school, she had switched schools, was receiving some really good mental health, and went right away into getting her bachelor's degree. From there, working human resources, she worked for a technical college and she attained her master's degree. A few years ago, she applied for a job working for Disney and now helps to coordinate parts of the human resource department for Disney, which is really cool. Looking at my mom's side, again, looking at those patterns, sadly, we have mental illness in that side of my family. So my grandmother Schultz was diagnosed probably when I was in my teens with bipolar, something she had suffered with her whole life. My mother was diagnosed when she was very young with schizophrenia. So both of which caused kind of that homemaker, not finding work that mentally could keep them stable. I am happy to see that generational. My family or my sisters and I have tried to break those patterns. My younger sister, the one that was in treatment, was diagnosed with bipolar when she was 16, but I can see generationally how that's affected possible job opportunities. But as I look to my own children, my nieces and nephews, which I did not include in this Genogram, they're all very young, that hopefully what my sisters and I are doing to try to break those patterns will just continue to better generation after generation and show them that they also have options in a variety of career pathways. As a family consumer science educator, I can absolutely see incorporating pieces of this Genogram with my students. Specifically, I teach a course on teen work where we do talk about work skills and job skills. I also have them interview somebody they know that has worked, and then they ask some questions about their first job, their best job, their worst job, as a lot of my students begin working at age 14 to 16, somewhere in that range. The only hesitation I would have, and I would have to really give some careful thought and consideration as to how I could approach this, of incorporating a Genogram like this into my classes, is that many of my families that I teach are much like mine. There's some generational dysfunction present. There might be mental illness present that they can see and pick up on patterns on how it could affect them. So as I were to possibly incorporate that into my classroom, I would just want to make sure that I was being very sensitive to all of my students' needs. I hope that you've enjoyed listening to my family genogram and our career work education history. This has been really eye-opening and actually very encouraging to look at. Into hearing stories from both my parents about my grandparents was just fascinating, as all of my grandparents have since passed. Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.